She had always been invisible in his world, until the day she went into labor in a luxury hospital her powerful husband had bought just for her, and the doctor bent close, his hands trembling. "Don't scream," he whispered, eyes darting to the cameras. "Call 911. Tell them you're being held and that your life and your baby's depends on it." Zoya froze. The paper on the tray in front of her bore her name, her signature, and a secret that could destroy her forever. Outside, her husband's mother smiled, calm, unshakable. But inside, the walls of power, wealth, and control were cracking, and Zoya had no idea how far someone would go to take everything from her. "Hi, my amazing family. It's a blessing to see you back at Mr. James' family. To every woman watching, may your heart overflow with joy, your mind stay sharp with courage, and your life be a beautiful testament to love. You are the heartbeat of our families and the silent architects of our future. If your heart beats for your family, like this video and share your love by typing "Family First" with Mr. James. Get ready, because today's story is one you will never forget. Zoya learned early how silence could hurt more than words. In her village, silence meant nightfall, the pause before crickets sang, the moment when mothers counted their children before closing doors. Silence there felt earned, gentle, safe. In the Vane mansion, silence felt like judgment. It pressed against her ears when she walked, thick and watchful, as if the walls themselves were aware she did not belong. The floors were polished so perfectly that her reflection followed her everywhere, dark skin against white marble, a living contrast that the house never let her forget. The mansion was not loud, yet it was never calm. There was always a distant hum, air systems whispering, cameras clicking softly, elevators gliding like ghosts behind walls. Everything functioned, everything obeyed, except her. Zoya moved carefully, instinctively softening her steps, the way she used to walk past sleeping elders back home. But here, there was no one sleeping. This house never rested. It simply waited. She passed the portraits again. Men with pale faces and hard eyes, women wrapped in silk and entitlement. Generations of Vanes stared down at her, oil-painted lips pressed thin, as if offended by the warmth of her skin, by the life in her gaze. She wondered how many of them would have chosen silence too. At 24, she was young enough to still feel shock, old enough to hide it well. Her deep brown skin carried the sun of her childhood, the kind that no amount of luxury could bleach away. Her eyes, wide, observant, honest, still reflected open fields and riverbanks, places where people spoke even when they had nothing to say. Here, words were currency. Silence was power. Julian Vane was always there, and never really there. She sensed him before she saw him. His presence was like a shift in pressure, a tightening of the air. Sometimes she would pause at the top of the staircase because she knew he was somewhere below, moving through the house with precise, unhurried steps. He slept in the east wing. She slept in the west. Entire corridors existed only to keep them apart. They ate at the same table, but never together. Meals were served on schedules that did not overlap, as if the house itself was trained to prevent intimacy. Sometimes Zoya would see the faint imprint of his presence, an untouched glass of water, a folded napkin, the lingering scent of his cologne in the dining room. He spoke to her when necessary. "Tomorrow we'll have guests. The board meeting will run late. The doctor will visit at 10. His voice was calm, controlled, emotionless, not cruel, never cruel. That almost made it worse. Their marriage was not built on love. It was built on ink, a signature, a debt erased, a life rearranged. Zoya remembered the day she signed the papers. Her hand had trembled, not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. Her family needed saving. Julian needed resolution. The world called it an arrangement. Zoya called it survival. She had learned survival young. So she accepted. She endured. She learned when to speak and when not to. She learned which servants avoided her eyes and which offered small, silent kindnesses. A cup of tea placed closer, a shawl folded neatly. She learned that Lady Beatrice's footsteps sounded sharper than others, and that it was better to leave the room before those footsteps reached her. Julian saw everything and said nothing. That hurt in ways Zoya never admitted, even to herself. Then her body changed. At first, she thought it was stress, the fatigue, the strange hunger. The way smells made her stomach twist. She did not allow herself hope. Not in this house, not in this marriage. But the doctor confirmed it in a private room that smelled of antiseptic and money. Pregnant. The word landed between them like something fragile. Julian didn't touch her. He didn't smile. He didn't speak for a long moment. Zoya prepared herself for cold distance to harden into something worse. Instead, something shifted. Julian became present, not warm, not gentle. Alert. Security doubled overnight. New guards appeared at every entrance, faces unfamiliar, eyes sharp. Julian cancelled international trips without explanation. Meetings moved to video calls. The mansion's surveillance system was upgraded twice in 1 month. Then he bought a hospital, the Obsidian Medical Center. Zoya learned about it the way she learned most things in this marriage, after it was already done. Entire top floor reserved, private elevators installed, staff vetted personally. When she asked why, Julian paused. "Because I don't trust anyone," he said. It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her in weeks. She noticed the way his gaze followed her now, not possessive, not tender, protective, and afraid. That fear unsettled her more than his coldness ever had. Because Julian Vane was not a man who feared easily. One evening, Zoya stood by the tall windows in the West Wing, watching rain slide down glass thicker than her wrist. Lightning illuminated the grounds, perfectly trimmed hedges, stone paths without cracks, fountains that never ran dry. She placed a hand over her stomach, still flat, still secret in the quiet. Behind her, Julian stopped. She didn't turn. She felt him there, closer than usual. For a moment neither spoke. Then, softly, almost to himself, Julian said, "This house has taken everything from me that mattered." Zoya's breath caught. Before she could respond, he stepped back. The distance returned. The silence closed in again. But this time it felt different. He wasn't just watching her anymore. He was guarding something. And whatever he feared enough to build walls this high had already begun to move. That night, as Zoya drifted into uneasy sleep, she missed the quiet sound of a new lock sliding into place outside her door, installed on Julian's direct order for her safety. And somewhere else in the mansion, Lady Beatrice Vane stood before a mirror, smiling faintly as she whispered, "She still thinks silence can protect her." Lady Beatrice Vane did not rush her entrances. She never needed to. Her presence announced itself before her footsteps did. The house reacted to her the way people reacted to storms, quietly, instinctively, with a sense of preparation learned over years of damage. Zoya felt it before she saw her, that tightening in the chest, that warning pulse beneath the ribs. Lady Beatrice arrived more often once the pregnancy began to show, not dramatically, not with celebration, but with precision. Her visits were measured, timed, as if she were monitoring an experiment rather than acknowledging a child growing inside another woman. She would appear in the morning light, dressed in tailored elegance, pearls resting against pale skin like punctuation marks. Her eyes always found Zoya immediately, always. The smile came next, sharp, controlled, bloodless. "Zoya," she would say, as though testing the word's weight in her mouth. "You look well." It was never a compliment. It was an assessment. The first time Beatrice touched her, Zoya almost flinched. It was brief, fingers brushing her arm as if by accident. but the touch lingered a fraction too long, sliding over Zoya's skin with clinical curiosity. "Such healthy skin," Beatrice murmured, tilting her head. "Strong genes. Useful." The word landed wrong. Useful. Zoya's breath stilled, but her face remained calm. She had learned not to react. Reactions fed people like Beatrice. Silence starved them. So she didn't answer. She never did. The servants watched carefully when Beatrice was near. Zoya noticed how their eyes flicked between mother and daughter-in-law, how no one interrupted, how no one lingered long enough to be accused of witnessing too much. Julian was always present during these encounters, standing slightly apart, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. Zoya learned to watch his jaw. It tightened when his mother spoke about bloodlines. It tightened when she mentioned legacy. It tightened when her gaze lingered too long on Zoya's stomach. But he said nothing, not a word. The silence returned. Always silence. It hurt more now because Zoya could feel the child move sometimes, small, private reminders that she was no longer alone in enduring it. She found herself wishing Julian would speak, not for her, but for the child. That he would draw a line, even a thin one. He didn't. Lady Beatrice took this as permission. Her comments grew sharper, more specific. "How extraordinary," she said one afternoon, sipping tea in the sunroom, "that nature can be so unpredictable." Another day her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I suppose adaptability is a kind of strength." Zoya listened, stored every word. She understood that Beatrice never spoke carelessly. Every sentence was designed to travel somewhere, to settle, to poison slowly. Julian heard everything. Zoya knew because his jaw tightened harder now, the muscle pulsing as though fighting restraint. Sometimes his fingers curled, nails pressing into his palm. Still, silence. Then came the night the house forgot to sleep. Zoya had woken thirsty, the kind of thirst that crawled up the throat and refused to be ignored. She wrapped a shawl around herself and stepped into the hallway, bare feet sinking into thick carpet. The mansion was dim, lights lowered to night settings. Shadows stretched longer here, bending around corners. She had just reached the stairwell when she heard her. Lady Beatrice's voice carried easily in the quiet. "The child will not change the bloodline." Zoya stopped. Her heart began to beat too loudly. Beatrice stood near the study doors, phone pressed to her ear, her back partially turned. She sounded calm, certain, dangerous. "I won't allow it," she continued. There was a pause. Zoya leaned slightly closer, breath shallow, every instinct screaming not to be seen. "Yes," Beatrice said softly. "Everything is already in place." The line went dead. For a moment, Beatrice stood there, staring at nothing. Then she turned. Their eyes met. Zoya felt something cold slide through her chest. Beatrice smiled, not the sharp social smile, something quieter, something private. Zoya returned to her room without being acknowledged. She did not run. She did not rush. Panic would have made noise, and noise was weakness here. She closed her door with care and leaned against it, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other over her mouth to keep from breathing too loudly. "Everything is already in place." The words echoed until dawn. Julian did not ask why she looked pale the next morning. He watched her more closely, though. His gaze tracked her movements like he was memorizing something he might lose. That afternoon, without discussion, he booked the delivery date. Early. Too early. Zoya sat across from him as he spoke with the hospital administrator on speaker. His voice was clipped, decisive. The administrator agreed to everything immediately. Private suite, restricted access, full medical discretion. Zoya felt the shift then, not relief, not comfort, but urgency. That night, Julian did something he had never done before. He didn't return to the East Wing. Zoya woke to the sound of a chair moving. Her eyes flew open. Julian sat beside her bed, not on it. On the chair. His jacket was folded neatly on the floor, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted in a way she had never seen before, like sleep was something he no longer trusted. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, but he stayed. Zoya lay still, listening. His breathing was slow but deliberate, awake breathing, the kind used by men who believed danger came when you closed your eyes. She turned her head slightly and watched him in the low light. For the first time since their marriage, Julian looked unsure. Not cold, not distant, guarded. Like a man standing watch over something fragile in a house built by enemies. Zoya placed a hand over her stomach. The baby moved. Julian noticed. His eyes softened for half a second before hardening again, as if he was afraid softness might cost him something. Neither of them slept. Outside the room, the mansion remained silent. But Zoya understood now. This silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. As dawn crept through the curtains, Zoya realized something chilling. Julian wasn't guarding her from the world. He was guarding her from someone already inside the house. Morning did not arrive gently. It came in layers of artificial light, filtered through tinted windows that refused to show the outside world honestly. The delivery suite on the top floor of Obsidian Medical Center looked more like a private residence than a hospital. Soft grey walls, muted gold accents, screens hidden behind panels until needed. Zoya lay on the bed, breathing steadily. Her body felt normal. No sharp pain, no panic. Just the heavy awareness of time moving forward whether she was ready or not. Two nurses moved quietly around her, efficient, polite, careful not to meet her eyes for too long. Their smiles were professional, practiced. Too practiced. Zoya noticed everything now. She had learned to. The door opened. Dr. Aris stepped inside. He was a man built on reputation. Tall, silver-haired, immaculate in posture and dress. His name was carved into plaques across the hospital. His hands had saved lives that made headlines. He was not supposed to be nervous. Yet his hands shook. It was subtle. Just enough for someone watching closely to notice. A tremor as he adjusted his gloves. A hesitation before touching the tablet in his hand. "You'll be fine," he said. Too fast. The words tripped over each other like they were trying to escape his mouth before his conscience could stop them. Zoya studied his face. She had met him twice before, calm, confident, almost gentle. This man avoided her eyes. "I feel fine," she said slowly. "No contractions, no pain." Dr. Aris nodded too quickly. Yes, of course." He tapped the tablet again. The screen lit up with charts she couldn't read from where she lay. "We're proceeding with an emergency C-section," he added. The word emergency echoed strangely in the room. Zoya's fingers curled into the sheets. "That's not what we discussed." The nurses stilled. For half a second, no one moved. Dr. Aris's eyes flicked, not to Zoya, but to the small black camera mounted high in the corner of the room. Then to the door. Zoya followed his gaze. Her heart began to pound. He stepped closer, blocking the camera's view with his body as he pretended to check her IV. His breath was uneven now, shallow, as if every inhale cost him something. "Don't scream," he murmured. The words were barely sound. Zoya's blood went cold. "I've disabled the room's intercom," he continued, voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "You have less than 2 minutes before someone notices." Her mind raced, struggling to keep up. "Take my phone," he said quietly, pressing his hand against his coat pocket. "Call 911. Tell them you are being held at Obsidian, top floor." Zoya didn't move. Shock pinned her in place. "Your husband's mother," he said, swallowing hard, "signed something she had no right to sign." The words landed like a blow to the chest. Fear crawled up Zoya's spine, sharp and cold, sinking its claws deep. She felt suddenly exposed, like the walls had pulled away and left her alone in a room full of eyes she couldn't see. "This isn't about delivery," Dr. Aris whispered. "It's about ending you, or ending your future." A nurse shifted near the door. Dr. Aris straightened immediately, voice rising. "Blood pressure looks stable," he said loudly, for the benefit of unseen listeners. Then, without looking at Zoya, he added under his breath, "Please, you have to trust me." Trust. The word tasted bitter. Zoya's thoughts fractured, memories flashing too fast to hold. Lady Beatrice's smile, the late-night phone call, Julian booking the delivery early, sleeping in the chair like a guard who expected attack, everything aligned. She slowly slid her hand toward Dr. Aris's pocket. Her fingers brushed cold metal. The phone. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure someone else could hear it. Dr. Aris's face glistened with sweat now. "I shouldn't be doing this," he whispered. "But I already signed one lie. I won't sign another." "Why?" Zoya breathed. His jaw tightened. "Because I have a daughter," he said simply, "and because guilt is heavier than fear." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone paused outside the door. Zoya wrapped her fingers around the phone and pulled it free, hiding it beneath the blanket as the door opened and another staff member stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Everything on schedule?" the woman asked. Dr. Aris forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perfectly." Zoya stared at the ceiling, pulse roaring in her ears. She had seconds, and the room felt smaller by the breath. As Zoya unlocked the phone with shaking fingers beneath the sheets, the anesthesia cart rolled closer to her bed, and Dr. Aris realized, with a flick of terror in his eyes, that someone had reactivated the camera. Zoya's hand trembled as it brushed against cold metal in the doctor's pocket. The weight of the small device was heavier than she expected, though it was no larger than a phone. Sweat ran down her palm, but she didn't pull away. She could feel the pulse of the room through her fingertips, the quiet hum of monitors, the faint hiss of oxygen lines, the rhythmic ticking of some hidden clock counting her minutes. Each sound sharpened her senses, making the air feel thicker, as though it carried a secret meant only for her. She slid her fingers along the pocket, her heart hammering, and pulled the phone free. Her breath caught as she lifted it into view. It was small, but it held the power to call for help. Her pulse raced with both relief and fear. Then her eyes flicked to the tray beside her bed. A document lay there, crisp and white, edges carefully aligned as if nothing else in the room existed except it. Zoya's stomach twisted. Consent form. She froze. Her name was written on it, elegant cursive, flawless. But the signature wasn't hers. Her chest tightened, the line between disbelief and terror blurring. She leaned forward, reading every word slowly, each syllable slicing into her like shards of ice. The fine print was worse than she could have imagined. If the child were female, a daughter, a secondary procedure was authorized. Permanent, irreversible, words that meant endings, not beginnings, words that could erase her future before it had even begun. She swallowed hard. The sound seemed deafening in the otherwise quiet room. Her baby stirred within her, a kick, small but insistent, and Zoya felt a spark of life that made her stomach clench. The movement, so ordinary in any other circumstance, became a lifeline. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the tiny resistance of her child, her daughter, her Amara. The knowledge settled like stone in her chest. Her daughter, a girl. The procedure outlined in the form would ensure she never had the chance to live as fully as she might. The weight of betrayal pressed against her like the walls themselves had narrowed, shrinking the room into a trap. Her fingers shook as she lifted the phone again, careful not to make a sound. She took a photo of the document, ensuring every detail was visible. Then, with trembling hands, she sent it to the only person who could act, Julian. The phone buzzed faintly in her grip as the message went through. Her lips parted, and she whispered, barely audible even to herself, "Please, see this." At that precise moment, The drip began. The anesthesia. Slowly, carefully, a cold liquid running through the IV line into her veins. The world began to blur. Shapes lost their edges. The room melted, becoming softer around the corners, a painting left unfinished by a careless hand. Her pulse raced faster than ever, a hammering drum echoing in her ears. Panic tried to claim her, but she gripped the edges of the bed, clinging to the sensation of reality with all the strength she had left. The door stayed closed. No one entered, no one came, and then, as if the walls themselves remembered, the memory of a voice floated through her mind. Lady Beatrice Vane. Calm, deliberate, cold. "I won't allow it," it echoed, bouncing off the walls and into her bones. The words had weight. They were a promise, not a threat, not an idle thought, a plan, already set in motion, already deadly. Zoya's eyes darted around the room. Monitors, trays, cabinets, security cameras in the corners, their lenses black and unblinking, watching. Her stomach twisted again. A fluttering panic mingled with the life she carried. She could see Dr. Aris now, standing a few feet away, hands trembling despite his attempts at composure. His lips moved slightly, whispering something she could not hear, a silent plea, perhaps, to do what was right, to survive. Zoya took a deep, shaky breath. Every fiber of her body screamed to run, to resist, to fight the invisible trap closing around her. Her hands gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white, her thoughts scattering in a storm. Anesthesia will come. She has the power. The consent form is forged. Julian, he has to see this. He has to. Her head spun. The edges of her vision darkened as the drugs spread their icy influence. She fought the pull, blinking rapidly to keep the room in focus. Panic fought against sedation, adrenaline against inevitability, and then came the sound. A faint click, soft but deliberate, from the door. Zoya's body froze. The click repeated, a second deliberate pause before it moved again. Someone, or something, was coming closer. The footsteps were slow, calculated. Dr. Aris glanced toward the sound. His hands shook harder now, sweat glistening on his forehead. "They know," he whispered. "They're coming." Zoya tried to shift, tried to lift herself, but the bed felt heavier than ever. The anesthesia was gaining ground. Her daughter kicked again, urgently, and it anchored Zoya just enough to keep her awake, to force her to notice. Her mind raced, desperate, chaotic, trying to thread a path through the growing panic. She has already signed the papers. Someone else, someone dangerous, is here. Julian. He needs to see this. Someone must stop her. The sound outside the door stopped. Silence fell. A pause that stretched impossibly long, making the air itself feel thick and suffocating. And then a shadow appeared beneath the door. A small, deliberate one. A figure moved just enough to be seen, as if testing her reaction. Zoya's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Dr. Aris's voice was barely audible. "Stay calm, just stay calm." But Zoya knew that calm was no longer an option. Every instinct in her screamed that the danger was immediate. The forged papers, the power over her life, and now someone testing the room, it all collided into one harsh truth. Her life, and her child's, were no longer hers to control. The shadow slipped under the door again, this time moving faster. Zoya's eyes widened as a small metallic click sounded from the lock. Someone was trying to enter, and in that instant, the anesthesia began to pull her under. She was fading, and the danger was already inside. Julian's hands clenched around the polished railing of the private elevator. The lights flickered once, just a pulse, and then steadied again. Nothing seemed amiss, except the oppressive weight pressing against his chest. The sense that every wall, every panel of this building was conspiring to hold him in place. He had been summoned here under the guise of urgency. A private elevator, floor to floor, supposedly necessary to finalize the Vane family trust revisions. The documents had been placed in front of him with careful attention, stamped and signed with the authority he trusted, or thought he trusted. But trust had a cost, and tonight it was exacting its toll. Marcus Hale, his mother's lawyer, smiled faintly from across the elevator, a man of impeccable tailoring and perfectly groomed hair, carrying an aura of smug confidence. Julian had worked with him in the past, considered him reliable until tonight. Every glance, every nod, now carried threat disguised as professionalism. "Julian," Marcus said smoothly, "the board has approved the changes. All signatures are verified. Your mother insisted on speed. It's—" His voice faltered just enough to betray control. "Important for the family legacy." Julian's piercing blue eyes did not leave Marcus. "Legacy," he said slowly, "has nothing to do with honesty, does it?" Marcus did not respond. Julian's phone buzzed. One buzz. He glanced down. One image. The forged consent form. Zoya's name. The signature. Elegant, perfect, but not hers. And beneath it, the words that cut through him like a blade. Secondary procedure authorized. Permanent. Irreversible. Time slowed. Julian did not speak. His jaw tightened. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization of what his mother had orchestrated. Every meeting, every subtle instruction she had given in his presence, all lies, every promise of safety for Zoya, every reassurance meaningless unless he acted now. Marcus's smile broadened. "Julian, you should understand. This is business, family business. You know the stakes. Your mother only wants what's best." Julian didn't finish listening. He slammed his hand against the emergency glass. The sound of shattering echoed through the elevator, sharp and final. Pain lanced up his hand, warmth spreading quickly, but he didn't flinch. There was no time for hesitation, no luxury for caution. The glass was broken. The red alarm flashed. "Julian!" Marcus shouted. His voice was calm but brittle, an attempt at authority, cracking under sudden chaos. "Stop! That's—" But Julian did not stop. He didn't wait for the doors to unlock. He didn't pause for security guards or the stifled whispers of the floor attendants pressed to the elevator shaft. He moved like a man propelled by something far more potent than fear, love, determination, rage. The blood from his hand smeared along the railing, but he didn't care. Pain was irrelevant. Only action mattered. By the time the first security guard realized something was wrong, Julian had already forced the elevator to the next floor, jammed the doors, and sprinted toward the stairwell. The emergency alarm rang, the red light flashing, but it was too late. Julian Vane was moving faster than anyone could predict, faster than any protocol could contain. He didn't think of the cameras, the witnesses, the consequences. Not now. He thought only of Zoya, only of the daughter moving inside her, the life he could not let be taken, the woman who had been invisible in his life for too long, dismissed, overlooked, scorned by a mother he had long feared. Now, she was the only reason he could not be still. The stairwell doors were cold under his hands as he pushed them open, the echo of his bare feet on marble steps ringing like drums in a silent hall. He ran down, floor after floor, past empty hallways, past flickering lights, past a city of rooms that had once been symbols of wealth and control. Now they were cages, and he was breaking free. Marcus Hale's voice followed him, strained but urgent. "Julian, you don't know what you're doing. Stop!" But Julian's ears were deaf to everything but the sound of his own heartbeat. Each beat was a vow, each step a promise he had delayed for far too long. He would not allow another second of control to be taken from him. He would not allow his mother to dictate the fate of his wife or his child. Security attempted to intercept him. Hands reached, but Julian's momentum was unstoppable. He barreled past them, knocking guards aside, not as a billionaire outraged by broken protocol, but as a husband enraged by betrayal. He was unrecognizable to the world. By the time he reached the private vehicle waiting below, adrenaline and fury gave him impossible speed. He didn't wait for doors to unlock fully. He kicked them open, leaped inside, and slammed the accelerator down. The city blurred past, lights and shadows stretching into long streaks. He didn't call anyone yet. He didn't need to. He only had to reach her. He only had to protect her. Through the rush of speed, his mind replayed the image he had seen, the signature that wasn't hers, the document that spelled danger for both mother and child. Rage mingled with fear, determination fused with guilt. He had failed Zoya in silence for too long. Now there would be no silence. The streets flew past in a storm of reflections and neon, but Julian saw only one destination. One goal, one chance to save what mattered. Even in his mind, he could hear her heartbeat, fragile yet persistent. He could hear the faint echo of the kick he had imagined when she had held her belly. The life inside her, his daughter, was counting on him. Julian's hands gripped the wheel like a lifeline, knuckles white, his eyes sharp, burning with a rare, furious clarity. He didn't think of billion-dollar deals or reputation. He didn't think of his mother's wrath or legal ramifications. He thought of Zoya, and he thought of his daughter, and that thought alone made him unstoppable. Inside the Obsidian Medical Center, Zoya's eyes fluttered as the anesthesia deepened, her fingers still clutching the phone. And just as Julian barreled through the city, the stairwell above her floor clicked, soft, deliberate, and heavy. Someone had reached her door, and they were about to enter. The operating room doors flew open. The sound cut through the sterile calm like a blade, sharp and final. Every head turned at once. The rhythm of machines didn't stop, but the room's balance did. Something irrevocable had entered with that noise. Julian stood in the doorway, chest heaving. He didn't look like a man who belonged in this place of controlled movements and practiced calm. His hair was undone, no longer sculpted into the image the world recognized. His suit was stained, blood darkening the cuff of his sleeve, smearing the side of his hand. His eyes were wild, not with confusion, but with a clarity so fierce it bordered on frightening. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then Julian's gaze dropped. He saw the papers first. They were spread on a tray, neat and deliberate, like a verdict waiting to be read. He didn't need to touch them. He recognized the structure, the legal language, the precision of his mother's world. Then he saw Zoya. Her skin looked paler than it should have, the warmth he loved dulled by the haze pulling her under. Her lashes fluttered, fighting a losing battle. One hand lay slack against the bed, the other barely curled, as if holding on to something invisible. And in that instant, everything aligned. The silence he had mistaken for control. The obedience he had called order. The distance he had justified as protection. He understood. Julian didn't shout. He moved. The guards stepped forward on instinct, hands lifting, voices forming words that never made it out. Julian shoved past them like they were made of smoke. His shoulder clipped one, sent another stumbling back. There was no hesitation, no calculation. He dropped to his knees beside the bed. The floor was cold through the fabric of his trousers, but he didn't register it. He took Zoya's hand, careful despite the urgency, as if afraid she might shatter if he held her too tightly. "I was blind," he whispered. The words scraped out of him, raw and unfamiliar. His voice broke on the second word, the fracture unmistakable. "I thought silence was control." His forehead pressed briefly against the edge of the bed, just for a breath, just long enough for the truth to pass through him completely. Tears fell onto her hand. He didn't wipe them away. He kissed her knuckles, brown, warm, real, like grounding himself in something undeniable. "I will burn this city down," he said quietly, the promise steady, even as his breath shook, "before they touch you or our daughter." The word daughter settled into the room with weight. Dr. Aris stepped back, relief crashing into terror so violently it made him dizzy. His hands trembled openly now. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and yet, for the first time that morning, he did not regret it. Outside, sirens screamed. The sound filtered in through sealed walls, distant but insistent, a reminder that the world beyond this room had noticed the fracture. A nurse cleared her throat, unsure, eyes darting between Julian and the door. "Mr. Vane, the procedure." Julian looked up, not sharply, not angrily, calmly. The kind of calm that comes after something inside has already shattered. "No one touches her," he said. "Not a command. A fact." Another guard stepped forward, braver than the rest. "Sir, hospital protocol." Julian rose slowly to his feet. Blood dripped from his hand onto the pristine floor, bright against white. He didn't seem aware of it. His eyes never left Zoya. "You work in a building I own," he said evenly. "Every camera, every door, every contract." He finally turned, gaze settling on the room like a weight. "And every person in here will decide right now which side of this they're on." The guard hesitated. That was enough. Dr. Aris spoke then, voice unsteady but clear. "The consent is invalid," he said. "Forged. I have proof." Julian nodded once. "Good." Zoya stirred, a faint sound escaping her throat, half breath, half protest. Julian was instantly back at her side, lowering himself again, brushing her hair back with a gentleness that felt almost painful to witness. "I'm here," he said softly, for her alone. "Stay with me." Her lips moved, but no sound came. The anesthesia was still pulling her down. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked up at Dr. Aris. "How long?" "Minutes," Aris said. "Maybe less." Julian exhaled slowly, steadying himself, then leaned closer to Zoya's ear. "Listen to me," he murmured. "I know you're tired. I know it's heavy. But you are not alone. Not now. Not ever again." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, anchoring, present. The doors at the far end of the room opened again, this time without force. A familiar presence filled the space. Lady Beatrice Vane did not raise her voice. She never needed to. She stepped inside with measured grace, eyes cool, expression composed, as if she were arriving at a meeting she had scheduled herself. Her gaze went first to Julian's bloody hand, then to Zoya on the bed, then back to Julian. "You're making this very dramatic," she said calmly. Julian stood. The distance between them felt like a fault line. "This ends now," he said. Beatrice smiled faintly. "No," she replied. "It simply changes shape." As Lady Beatrice's eyes shifted toward the tray of papers, the heart monitor beside Zoya's bed changed rhythm. And Dr. Aris turned sharply, fear flooding his face as he said, "Julian, something's wrong." The doors of the operating suite burst open again, this time with a force that sent everyone into immediate alert. Red and blue lights from police vehicles painted the walls, slashing across the white tiles like a warning. Julian did not flinch. He didn't step back. His hand never left Zoya's, her fingers entwined with his, warm and real in a world that had been cold for far too long. The officers moved quickly, precise, authoritative, cutting through the confusion with practiced efficiency. Board members who had been overseeing every detail, every protocol, every decision that had endangered Zoya and their unborn child were being detained. Handcuffs clicked, papers were seized, phones taken, and in that sudden chaos, the power structures that Lady Beatrice had spent decades meticulously building began to crumble. She stood still, silent. Not a muscle betrayed panic or surprise. Her gaze, however, was fixed entirely on Julian. The blue of his eyes, the intensity that had erupted when he had stormed through the city and then the hospital, held her attention. She smiled, calm, composed, chilling. "You chose her over me," she said. The words were quiet, almost conversational, but they struck the room like a hammer against glass. Julian did not respond. He did not need to. His answer was in the way his fingers squeezed Zoya's hand. His answer was in the way he leaned slightly over her, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead, whispering reassurances even though she could barely respond. Zoya's chest rose and fell, her breaths shallow but determined. The anesthesia had done its work. Yet she clung to awareness, to the reality of him at her side, grounding her in a world that had tried to strip her of control, of agency, of life. Dr. Aris worked with renewed focus, calm only because Julian's presence stabilized the room. Every incision, every cut, every careful motion was executed with precision. The monitors beeped steadily, then faltered slightly, then steadied again. Zoya felt her pulse racing, the movement of her daughter inside her growing stronger. Every kick was a signal, a reminder, a plea to survive, to be born into a world where her father had finally chosen to act, not as a billionaire but as a husband, a protector. Outside, chaos erupted in the halls. Security guards tried to call for backup. Officers barked commands, phones rang and clicked, yet inside this room the tension coalesced into a singular focus: survival. Zoya's hands shook, but she found the strength to lift them to her chest, pressing against Julian's palm. His thumb traced small circles over the back of her hand, a silent vow, a connection that grounded them both. Lady Beatrice was escorted out, her smile never faltering. The officers didn't understand it at first. They assumed fear, assumed shock, assumed regret. But her calm revealed a deeper calculation. "You think this changes anything," she said, her voice low enough that only Julian could hear it. "But bloodlines are never truly broken." Julian's jaw clenched. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself, forcing the rage into a controlled focus. He didn't answer her. He couldn't. Words would have been futile. Instead, he returned his attention fully to Zoya. Minutes stretched. The room's tension became almost tangible. Every assistant, every nurse, every doctor moved, like they were aware that history was being rewritten, that the next moments would define the life of both mother and child. And then it happened. A sharp cry, a single, piercing, unmistakable sound. Amara. The baby's first breath tore through the room with the force of existence itself. Julian's eyes closed instinctively. Relief, disbelief, love, guilt and joy all collided at once. He felt tears slide down his cheeks, unbidden, unrestrained. For the first time in years, he wept openly. He bent over the small bundle, brushing his lips lightly over the infant's forehead. "Amara," he whispered. The name left his lips like a prayer, a promise, a declaration. Zoya's eyes, barely open, sought his. A small, tired smile curved her lips, warmth and pride mingling in her gaze. Despite exhaustion, despite fear, despite every attempt to take away their future, they had survived. Dr. Aris exhaled, finally allowing himself a small smile. "She's strong," he said. "Both of them are strong." Julian's gaze swept the room. Monitors, nurses, guards, officers, the papers, the empty tray that had once held a forged signature. His hands were still trembling, but this time from relief, not rage. Lady Beatrice, now seated in the back under police supervision, maintained her composure. She did not scream, she did not beg. She simply watched, calculating, already planning her next move, even as the city beyond the hospital began to regain order. Julian turned back to Zoya, holding Amara close, her tiny head resting against his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel something unfiltered, uncalculated, unmasked, vulnerable, human. Outside the operating room, sirens echoed, voices shouted, and somewhere in the distance, the city continued, unaware of the private war that had just been fought within these walls. Inside, Julian whispered again, voice soft, almost trembling. "We are together now, always." Zoya's lips parted slightly, a whisper barely audible. "Always," she echoed. Amara stirred again, small fists brushing Julian's chest. A tiny yawn escaped her lips, fragile and fierce all at once. Julian's thumb traced the soft curve of her cheek, anchoring himself to the moment, knowing it would pass all too quickly. Even with victory, Julian's mind could not ignore the warning in Lady Beatrice's calm demeanour. He had saved them today, but she had not been defeated, only delayed. A subtle, almost imperceptible movement caught Julian's eye. A hand slipped from behind the curtains, reaching toward the incubator, and the shadow of someone familiar but unexpected loomed, silent, watching, waiting. Julian's hand shook, not from rage, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility he had carried for far too long. The air of the Vane Empire, once polished and unyielding, now seemed hollow around him. Every office, every chair, every golden plaque commemorating deals and decisions made in silence was suddenly meaningless. He had spent decades living under the illusion of control, yet true control had been nothing more than a veneer, fragile and easily broken. He dismantled it all. The board members, the trust documents, the legal chains that had bound both him and his family, they crumbled under his insistence. Contracts he had signed in obedience to Lady Beatrice were voided, signatures annulled. Every room, every file, every committee that had protected deception and privilege now lay bare. The empire of perfection and wealth had sheltered monsters, and he was determined that it would no longer stand. Testifying against his mother was a blow that few could imagine. Julian's voice, once reserved and cold, now rang with conviction. Every word was measured, precise, unflinching. He spoke not just for himself, but for Zoya, for Amara, for the life that should never have been threatened. Lady Beatrice sat in the courtroom, her face calm, almost serene, as if this spectacle had been anticipated all along. But Julian ignored her. He had no need to challenge her smile. What mattered was the truth, and it was heavier than any inherited power. He fired himself from the empire she had built, the empire he had once thought was his by birthright. There was no ceremony, no dramatic farewell. There was only a decision, freedom, responsibility, and a chance to build something real. At home, Zoya's recovery was slow, a delicate unfolding of strength and endurance. Julian never left her side. He learned patience as she learned to trust. He learned to hold a spoon, to guide it without rushing her. He learned to listen, to hear what she said and what she did not say. Apologies became a language he had never mastered before. He spoke without defending himself, without excusing years of silence and coldness. Words fell softly, grounded in understanding, in remorse, in the longing to be worthy of her presence. Love did not arrive suddenly. It did not flash or ignite in a single moment. It grew, quietly, honestly. They spent mornings together in the nursery, Julian watching Zoya cradle Amara as the baby stretched and yawned. Sometimes he would hum softly, learning the tune Zoya preferred, until she smiled and told him he was beginning to get it right. Slowly, he became part of the rhythm of the household. Not as a billionaire, not as an heir, but as a husband and father. He would sit beside her as she nursed, not speaking unless spoken to, offering his hand, a brush of his thumb across her skin, or the soft warmth of a shoulder pressed to hers. In those moments, the walls between them thinned. The distance that had once been vast and cold shrank into quiet intimacy. Julian learned her habits. The way she always folded the blanket around Amara's tiny shoulders just so. The careful way she washed her hands, as if each drop of water could wash away more than dirt, could wash away fear, guilt, history. He memorized the little lines that appeared on her forehead when she was tired, when she was frustrated, when she was lost in thought. And Zoya, who had endured so much, began to trust the silence between them as much as the words. She watched him change, not with fanfare, not with declarations, but in small gestures. The careful way he prepared her tea, the protective instinct that never overstepped, the steady presence even in moments of doubt. Love grew in quiet spaces, in unspoken apologies, in patience, in the rhythm of daily survival and care. Julian did not try to fix everything at once. He let her teach him, Let her guide him. Let the intimacy be measured. And in the space of that measured love, something fragile and exquisite flourished. Amara's laughter began to fill the rooms, and with it, the mansion felt different. The walls that had once imprisoned, the ceilings that had loomed oppressively, now seemed to cradle the new family. Julian watched his daughter, hearing her tiny squeals, seeing her eyes widen with curiosity, and felt something deeper than any boardroom victory or legal triumph, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with wealth or title. Night times became a ritual. Julian would hold both Zoya and Amara, letting them rest against his chest, feeling their warmth seep into him. He whispered promises he had never dared say before, promises of protection, of love, of devotion. Dr. Aris visited occasionally, offering updates and quiet smiles. The staff, once tense and alert, now moved with ease, relieved that the danger had passed and that the family they had risked everything to protect was finally safe. And yet, beneath this fragile calm, a tension remained. Lady Beatrice's influence had been curtailed, but it had not vanished. She was watching, calculating, waiting. Julian knew that the battle for their safety was far from over, but in the quiet moments, holding Zoya and Amara, he allowed himself to hope, to feel, to grow into the man he had never been before. The empire had fallen, the Ice King had cracked, but the man who remained was something entirely new, something human, something vulnerable, something capable of true love. Late one evening, as the family slept, a silent alert pinged on Julian's phone. A single message, anonymous. "You may have won the floor, Mr. Vane, but the war has only just begun." The room went still. Julian's fingers tightened on the device. Zoya stirred, half awake, and somewhere outside a shadow waited, patient, calculating, ready to strike again. 6 months had passed, but Julian's hands still trembled sometimes, not from anger, not from fear, but from the memory of how close he had come to losing everything. The mansion had changed, not the walls, not the gold or the marble, but the atmosphere. Laughter echoed where silence once ruled. Warmth replaced the calculated cold. Light poured in through tall windows, catching Zoya's skin in ways that made Julian's chest ache with recognition. She had always been sunlight, and now he could finally see it. He no longer walked ahead of her, nor did he linger behind. He moved beside her, always mindful of her pace, her breaths, her hesitations. Every morning began with small rituals. Amara wrapped in a soft blanket, Zoya sipping tea with her delicate fingers, Julian quietly observing, learning, adjusting. It wasn't grand gestures that defined their days. It was the small things, the brushing of hair behind an ear, the quiet acknowledgement when words failed. The laughter at Amara's tiny discoveries, her first wobbly steps, the way she reached for Julian's hand as if to anchor herself in a world that had once threatened to topple her. Julian had built a foundation, not for himself, not to restore his image, but in Zoya's name, her real name, her authentic voice, her life that had been silenced by power and privilege. The foundation supported women who had been erased, silenced, punished for existing. Those who had been told no, who had been made invisible. Julian poured every resource he had into it, not for recognition, but for redemption. At first, people called him a fool. Critics questioned why a man of his wealth and influence would leave the empire of his family, why he would risk public opinion to fight for causes that didn't serve him. They didn't understand. Julian didn't care. Not anymore. In the quiet hours, he watched Zoya teach Amara new words. Her voice was patient, gentle, strong. Her eyes shone with the kind of understanding that Julian had spent years trying and failing to grasp. He realized that true leadership, true power, had nothing to do with money or titles. It had everything to do with protecting what mattered, with love, with courage, and with integrity. He had learned how to apologize without explanation, how to support without controlling, how to listen without judgment. Zoya had taught him more than any boardroom ever could. Every moment beside her was a lesson in humility and humanity. Amara grew too. Her laughter became the music of the household. Julian would sit on the floor, watching her, discover the world, teaching her the lessons Zoya taught him: strength, compassion, resilience. He watched as Zoya's hand guided hers through simple tasks, each motion a quiet celebration of life, of survival, of choices made against impossible odds. Yet Julian never forgot the danger that had almost destroyed them. The memory of forged signatures, secret agreements, and his mother's calculated cruelty lingered. He knew that peace was fragile and that vigilance was necessary. But for now, he let himself breathe. He let himself trust. Each night, he held Amara against his chest as she drifted to sleep. Zoya lay beside them, her head resting on his shoulder, warmth against warmth. In those moments, Julian reflected on how precarious life had been, how easily it could have been taken from them, how much he had underestimated both his mother and his own capacity for action. He remembered the hospital room, the papers, the trembling hands of Dr. Aris, the suffocating silence of the mansion, and he knew, with an honesty he had never allowed himself before, that he would never allow fear or silence to dictate their lives again. Julian's choice had been made. He chose them, Zoya and Amara, over legacy, over wealth, over the empire of ice his family had built. And in doing so, he discovered that real power was not in domination or control. It was in love, in loyalty, in risking everything to protect the lives of those who mattered most. The world still watched, still whispered, still judged. But Julian had stopped listening. He was no longer the Ice King. That man had died in the elevator, in the hospital hallway, in the moment he had realized what he had nearly lost. The man who remained was human, imperfect, passionate, and deeply alive. Amara stirred, tiny hands reaching for his face. Julian smiled, heart swelling, and whispered to her softly, "You are our world." Zoya pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, quiet, knowing, and Julian felt the weight of years of regret and silence lift. Outside, the world moved on. The empire had been dismantled. Lady Beatrice had been neutralized, at least for now, but Julian knew life would always bring challenges, threats, and shadows. He didn't care, because the choice had been made. And choices, unlike wealth or power, could not be stolen from him. The laughter of his daughter, the warmth of his wife, the knowledge that he had finally acted when it mattered most, these were his victories, and he would defend them fiercely. That night, as the city slept, Julian's phone vibrated softly on the bedside table. A message appeared, unknown sender. "You may think you've chosen, Julian, but some debts are never paid." Julian's grip on the device tightened. Zoya stirred beside him, sensing the tension. And somewhere in the shadows, a new presence waited, patient, calculating, and ready to challenge everything they had built. The garden was quiet, save for the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a lazy wind and the occasional chirp of a bird that had made its home among the hedges. Julian sank onto the grass, not caring that it would stain his expensive trousers. The luxury of the past, the suits, the offices, the empire of cold control was irrelevant here. All that mattered now was the warmth pressed into his chest, the laughter of his daughter, and the woman who had taught him how to truly live. Amara wriggled in his arms, tiny fists punching the air in delight. Her eyes, wide and curious, reflected the sun's glow, a perfect mirror of innocence and life untainted by the shadows that had once haunted their world. Julian laughed, a sound so raw, so free it startled even him. It was a laugh unburdened by duty, expectation, or fear, a laugh that belonged entirely to this moment. Zoya watched quietly from a bench nearby, sunlight highlighting the richness of her skin, the glow of life and endurance that had survived more than most could imagine. Her gaze softened as she followed the movements of Julian and Amara, her lips curving into a gentle, proud smile. She felt the same warmth in her chest she had felt the first time Julian had stayed by her side in that hospital room, the same sense of fragile yet undeniable hope. Julian caught her eyes. They held the history of pain, the silent apologies, the mistakes, and the near losses they had endured together. He took a slow, deep breath, as if drawing in all the air of this life, this second chance. "Your skin," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "holds the warmth of the sun." Zoya blinked, taken aback for a moment. She had heard compliments, whispers, and praise before, but never like this, never layered with gratitude, love, and a recognition of everything she had endured. "And your heart," he continued, his thumb brushing the back of her hand, "saved this family." The words hung between them, heavy with honesty. Julian swallowed, as if forcing the weight of his confession down, letting it anchor him in the truth he had spent years avoiding. "I don't deserve you," he admitted, eyes tracing the fine lines on her face, the warmth that had survived even the coldest of storms. "But I will spend forever trying." Zoya didn't answer immediately. She studied him, noting the subtle change in his posture, the softness in his eyes, the way his hands, once instruments of command, now held a child and her hand with gentle care. She smiled, not a polite, measured smile, not one crafted to appease or hide emotion. It was full, luminous, real, a smile that acknowledged pain and joy, mistakes and triumphs, love earned and embraced. Julian's chest tightened. He leaned back slightly, letting the grass support him, letting himself breathe the moment fully. The garden felt larger than it was, more alive than any mansion, boardroom, or luxury he had ever known. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the trio, wrapping them in warmth that felt like a promise. Safety, family, and love had survived. Amara squealed, tugging at his collar, and Julian bent forward, kissing the top of her head. She giggled, tiny arms stretching out for Zoya. Julian handed her over, feeling the natural rhythm of their lives take shape. A daughter, a mother, and a father, learning to be fully present, fully human, and fully alive together. Julian spoke softly, almost to himself, almost to the universe. "We've been through storms I never imagined, but here we are, together." Zoya's eyes softened further. She reached for his hand again, intertwining their fingers. The physical touch felt symbolic, a silent agreement that whatever battles remained outside this garden, whatever shadows lingered, they had each other. They were no longer bound by fear, manipulation, or the cold dictates of a past empire. They were bound by choice, by love, by survival. The wind lifted, carrying the faint scent of flowers and fresh grass. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, allowing it to fill him with calm he hadn't known in years. The house behind them could wait. The world beyond could wait. In this small, sunlit garden, nothing mattered but the heartbeat of family, the laughter of Amara, and the shared warmth between him and Zoya. They sat in silence, and for the first time, Julian did not feel the need to speak, to protect, to command. He simply existed beside her, beside them. Presence replaced authority, care replaced coldness, forgiveness replaced guilt, and slowly, imperceptibly, the past loosened its grip. The threats, the betrayals, the almost loss, they were still there in memory, but they could no longer define the present. Julian had made a choice, a hard, unrelenting choice, and it had brought them here, to warmth, to laughter, to life. Even Lady Beatrice's shadow, the remnants of the empire, the whispers of betrayal, they all faded against this reality. Julian had rebuilt his life, not on wealth or power, but on love, honesty, and relentless protection of what truly mattered. He lifted Amara in his arms again, spinning her lightly as she shrieked with delight. Zoya laughed, the sound pure and unforced, and Julian realized he had finally arrived at a kind of freedom he had never known, as a billionaire, as a son, as a husband, lost in silence. It wasn't perfection. It was real. It was alive. It was theirs. Julian rested his forehead against Zoya's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin, the pulse of life that had endured so much. He whispered, almost in awe, "We are enough. We have survived. We are together." Zoya leaned her head against his, closing her eyes. Amara curled into them both, tiny breaths steady, safe, and unthreatened. The silence that stretched across the garden now was not empty. It was full of love, full of survival, full of all the words left unsaid that had found meaning in action, in presence, in enduring care. Julian opened his eyes. He looked at Zoya. He looked at Amara. And he saw not just the lives he had saved, but the life they had built together. He realized that true power was not in empires, contracts, or wealth. It was in holding her hand through fear. It was in keeping promises silently. It was in letting himself change, letting himself be vulnerable, letting love define him entirely. He kissed Zoya's temple. She smiled. Amara giggled. Julian allowed himself to finally exhale. No threats, no shadows, no empire could touch the life they had now. He had chosen warmth. He had chosen family. He had chosen love. And it was more than enough. Even in this peace, Julian felt the faintest trace of unease, the memory of debts unpaid, shadows watching, whispers of the past that never fully vanished. He looked at Zoya and Amara, holding them both, and whispered softly to himself, "No one will take you from me again, but some battles never truly end." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, as if hinting that while today they were safe, the world beyond still held challenges, yet unseen.